Good afternoon. We are, as you heard, recording. It's a great pleasure to welcome Domenico Dentoni to the ESI and our campus and the business school.
Thank you.
It's difficult for me to introduce Domenico without going into personal background and events, because we've been for a long time colleagues and friends. But to give you a summary, an overview about Domenico, he's professor at a business school in Montpellier, and he's very interesting job title, by the way, Business Resilience and Transformation, which I found like the good, the bad, and the ugly. They're very comprehensive. Domenico holds a PhD from Michigan State University. It was back 2009. Is it in agricultural economics or was
Yes.
it? Yes.
Culture, resource economics, natural resource, something like that.
Yes.
So long ago.
Then he decided to go on an adventure in Australia, University of Adelaide, for a little while, a year roughly. And then we met again when he started his tenure track as assistant professor in Wageningen University in the Netherlands. That was back in 2010-11. So we shared office for 2 years. And that's all about it, right? What happened in the office stays in the office.
Nothing too wild than yours.
Right. Then in 2021, he joined Montpellier. It's very difficult to summarize Domenico's interests. It's one of those colleagues and friends who I always look up for inspirations and figuring what's going on. He has been working on wicked problems, systems thinking, socio-ecological systems, system change or systemic change. We will hear about that today, cross-sector partnerships. And then we did stuff on community entrepreneurship, community-based enterprises, or different forms of entrepreneurship, and so on and so forth. It's been publishing in several outlets, including Organization Studies, Journal of Business Venturing, Journal of Business Ethics, and Business and Society. Very nice paper recently published, I really recommend. Was it in 2021 on systems and systems thinking? Enough about an introduction. Domenico, welcome. The floor is yours. And now go into the corner. And
Thank you. Thank you so much, Stefano. I mean, lovely introduction. So we're going to talk about systems mapping in food and agriculture practices and challenges. Pretty much what we do with systems mapping is doing it rather than talking about it. So today I'll do my best in just give you a bit of a narration about where we are with some of the work that we are doing and how we are trying to apply it in different ways. These are all pictures that we took a little bit from our experience. When I say our, is the work that I do with teams that I've developed and worked with in Wageningen University, actually with Stefano in 2015. One of the first times when we started practicing with systems mapping was with 60 Polish PhD students from different disciplines, coming from medicine to engineering to social sciences. And with them, we try to experiment, well, how can we work? How can we use these visual interfaces, these maps, in order to understand the collective problems and address them? So in general, when we're talking about systems mapping, just to clarify, what we're talking about is anything that has to do with creating visual depictions. So what you see here in these maps is, just a group of people, broadly speaking. So usually this is the co-creation of these visual sketches. There is a part where people discuss about stuff. There is a part where people present the outcome of their maps. And here you see some of the maps. We've done some of this work across Africa and increasingly around Europe. I'll tell you more about that. The work is very much interdisciplinary, as you will see. So, this type of work on systems mapping cuts across different disciplines. tell you more about that. So how I'm organizing my presentation here, I'll give you a quick introduction about what we are doing with systems mapping, how it fits also a bit into the debate that we had before with Anna in terms of understanding collective problems, how we can take action collectively around those issues. And then I'll try to bring you on specific applications that we're working on in Europe right now. It's the first year that we are working with this project that has multiple scales. So I'll bring you actually more doubts and more reflections than actual results. And then I will reflect a little bit about our practices. And I hope we'll have plenty of time for discussing with you what's the purpose of this systems mapping. So our general question, that as you can see, is extremely broad, but what we're interested in is trying to figure it out, a way of discussing with people that are part of, that feel part of agri-food systems, either farmers, businesses in food supply chains, or consumers, or any political groups that understands that has an interest to state around food and agriculture, to collectively understand their problems and collectively envision ways of addressing that. So the purpose of systems mapping is trying to foster dialogue based on a visual interface, so that in this battle of ideas, as Anna put it, we also have like something visual that we can anchor with, and in having these discussions. We start very much from systems thinking as a way of understanding complex realities and try to make sense of them. I come very much from more of a social science tradition, but what I've figured out along the way is that systems thinking, and in particular the practice of drawing maps of systems, is very much rooted also in sociological studies and very strong tradition also in engineering. And so when we talk about systems mapping in particular, we're talking about two different things. Okay, so the first thing is about discussing which tools, which interfaces we can choose in order to get a collective understanding of a problem and how to address it. And then the other thing that we can do actually is studying the process of developing a systems map. So I'll tell you more about what these specific maps look like and what's the logic behind that. But in general, what we're thinking is how you convene people, which people you want to convene, how you want to bring them together, how you can work with them in terms of developing these maps, and then what do you do with those maps? Because one of the major criticisms that all this systems mapping work in general systems thinking is that you create something that is extremely complex, and then what do you do with it, right? It's like, how do you move forward? As Anna put it before in the discussion before, how do you get something concrete out of it? So that is part of the challenge. So what have we done around this? Well, just click this. So we have it all. So in the past 8 years, we've done a bunch of things with this systems map. So this is a little bit where our reflections come from. So we started bringing systems mapping into courses. Then we do like usually 3-hour sessions. So if we had a little bit more time today, for example, we could actually get some maps. We either do it on paper or we do it online with softwares like Miro, or there's plenty of softwares out there where we can map together. Think about collective problems that bother us. Okay, that really like we can't. We want to have a hand on it and understand better how to address them, and then working with that. So usually in half a day or in a full day event, you can get a quite good understanding of a collective issue and how to address it. Hackathons, so this is a part that relates more to training. Another part where we started using this is what we refer to as project steering. So you can either develop a project from systems mapping, but you can also decide to change a project halfway in between, where you feel that teams are a little bit not too cohesive with each other. They're like really not, they're losing a sense of what they're doing together. So you can use systems mapping as a way of bringing the team back together on board. Doing something like what is called often in project like a theory of change. This is something that for a for a systems thinker, it's really hard to get a grip on, right? Because theory of change means thinking about what the impacts can be, but then there could be so many different ways to reach those impacts. So how do you go about that? The systems mapping would help. In other contexts, we use it more as vision building. So there was a case where we use it, this is a symbol of Extinction Rebellion at Wageningen University, large agricultural and food university in the Netherlands, which has a Unilever in campus now, has R&D facilities in their campus. Okay, so in that case, Extinction Rebellion was really bringing together students to this for our online audience. Okay, perfect. Hi to our online audience, by the way. So 34 participants. Sorry, I'm facing there. Is that the camera we're using? Okay. Hi to all of you over there too. Sorry for my shoulders, but anyways. So in this case, for vision building, is more about how you can bring people that are part of a movement, that have like sparse ideas that are kind of channeled towards a broad general direction of change. How can you convey their message in a way that help them to channel their message in a way that is coherent versus making some change? So around this, that we started over the years, start doing research. So meaning, as we engaged more in this practical side of activities in project training and vision building, then we start thinking, okay, what are we doing actually with systems mapping? Should we investigate and and theorize a little bit about why we're doing this? What is our goal? Because what our initial push here was very much into let's do that because it feels like society is demanding us, exactly because there is often these sparse ideas on how to reach goals of sustainability that are not having coherence with each other. And so we are always also looking for funding, and we find quite in this methodology into place because it's very transversal. You can apply to many disciplines, to many social issues, to many societal groups. So this is a little bit our experience. 2 more slides, and then I'll pause for questions, because otherwise I start getting bored by my own voice. And then when I get bored by my own voice, I guess it's becoming boring also for you. But if that's okay for you, we'll take small breaks for questions. Okay, this is quite important because as I was showing this to maps, to understand the logic and a specific approach of what we map in order to get an interaction between our participants when we do the systems mapping. So what are we actually mapping, right? That's the question. Systems mapping, what are we mapping? First of all, we're mapping problems, the way participants understand it. So usually we have 4 phases, and these are iterative. The first phase is a phase of sense making, understanding problems. And so we're using causal loop diagrams, which is a way of drawing causal relationships between variables that altogether compose a problem. Okay, so if you think about an issue like carbon emissions or food insecurity or any issue that really bothers you, poverty, inequality, you can possibly think to break it down into a set of variables that are interconnected with each other. And one of the key aspects of this work that really gives us energy is that as you map a problem, actually you can map it also as a set of interrelated actors. Okay, so you can take that problem and then you can translate it into how actors are actually interacting with each other, which resources they are sharing, and how these resources are interconnected. I'll give you an example after with the case of France. And this is usually called the value network maps. And they are particularly helpful because they show how resources are interconnected. So this is more of a descriptive part of the exercise, which we feel is absolutely incomplete if there is not also a second part. And the second part is envisioning, starting from this sense-making part. So because we know that, if we want to address an issue, any issue in our lives, personal or collectively, we need somehow make sense of it as we move to action, right? Especially when we want to address it collectively. So based on this principle then, and the maps that we draw with our participants, then we think together, where do we want to intervene into the understanding of this problem? So we basically, based on the map that we have, we think where is the point where collectively we can agree that would be helpful to intervene. And then of course, usually there is disagreement because everybody thinks that it would be better to address the problem in different ways. And hopefully there could be some coherence into how different actions can bring us forward into change into a certain direction. If there is no agreement, perhaps there could be agreement to disagree, or even if you don't even agree to disagree, you can think about, well, if other people are doing that, then maybe the best of my roles would be to act in a complementary way so that we make the change that we can make in a certain direction. And this would be still incomplete whether we don't visualize it. And so that's what we do with our participants in terms of which bridges or which ways we can shift our actors in a way that our actors related to this problem in a way that actually enacts the change that we see here. So all of this may sound very theoretical, okay? So hang on, we'll bring it to a case. But the implications of doing this is I think my last slide before taking a pause here, is why we are doing this, why we may need to think about problems and actors as entrenched with each other, and between these two phases of sense making and envisioning. Because ultimately, we are all struggling with targeting multiple goals, aren't we? In a way, when we're thinking about issues of biodiversity, food insecurity, rural poverty, and so on, like this, we feel like we're in a crunch. Okay, this is at collective level, but also at more personal level. So this is in the same way you can think it. How can we, take actions, our own actions, in a way that we are addressing these multiple goals at the same time? So this is like a major question, right? So one way we can think about this is there is written our own actions. Okay, so one way we can hopefully do something productive as part of a system, as considering as part of a system, is that we can generate ripple effects. So usually when I talk with my students, for me, teaching is part of my activity. So hopefully through my teaching, our work in our labs and so on, we can generate ripple effects that help target these multiple goals. Is this enough? Well, not quite. We also need to consider that there are unintended consequences. We are responsible to understand the unintended consequences of our own actions or collective actions. And we need to also consider how we are coping with bottlenecks. Examples of bottlenecks are something like building trust, limited trust, or, as Italians or in France, in the case you will see after bureaucracy, often we have like innovative ideas that we want to put into practice, but then there is like constraints, right? Material constraints or bureaucratic constraints that do not allow us to move on. And so if we see our role as basically interconnected with other people that are taking complementary actions, and strategize with who we partner and how we partner in order to address these bottlenecks, in order to generate ripple effects that consider also unintended consequences, then together as small ants, as part of a colony, then perhaps we can do something productive. So let me pause it here for a moment before I move further. Do you have any questions so far?
I need to also open it up to the online people. So I'll de-share for a minute so that we can. So people online, if you have so we're basically just sort of taking short, maybe clarification questions.
Clarifications, yeah. Anything that has to do with either you don't understand what I'm talking about, or a specific point that you think may help orient discussion.
So just raise your hands online or in the room, and then if you're sitting in the back, you need to speak up because the microphone's here. Oh, everybody happy?
Can I ask a clarification question? So if you start your causal loop diagram, like what is the first thing that you do? Like what is like I have a pen, what is the first thing I write down?
Excellent question. The thing that bothers you the most, that's usually what you want to start with. Because as you do that, and that of course depends on the purpose of convening and how you convene people. You know, there could be already part of the discussion on you know, food insecurity versus innovation and so on. So that could steer it a bit. But usually to get the energy in the room within the topic, the broader topic of the discussion, the thing that individually bothers you the most that you want to share with a small team. Usually we form teams of like 4 to 6 people. Okay, at minimum 3, no more than 6, and then as part of a larger group. And the more you write something that bothers you, you know, either the better it is, because then you can start building from something that that you are living, from your own lived experience. If it was not your own lived experience, you wouldn't mention it probably. And so then the game in a way is to look at the interconnections. You know, for example, if I'm bothered by mosquitoes. I live in Montpellier now, I'm bothered by mosquitoes, right? There's mosquitoes 8 months a year. You know, they're biting me and all my kids, you know, and, you know, our whole family are full of mosquitoes when we're there, mosquito bites. That is connected with biodiversity loss, climate change, and all of that. So that is a way that you can start connecting things.
But where do you set the system boundary? Because, you know, you being bothered about mosquitoes might be important in one context, but pretty irrelevant or not so important in another. So how do you, I mean, you as a group, you come together with already some sort of purpose in mind, right?
Yes. So indeed, part of the challenge is that whatever we map is a reflection of what we value and what we perceive. So for example, when we, if we bring together into a room, people that perhaps are represented in this room, so natural and social scientists, most likely the debate will be on a scientific level around these 2 disciplines, because this is what we perceive. Okay, but if we do it in a community, or if we do it in a rural village of Malawi, where people are, you know, trying to sell the milk of their cows before it goes rotten, then the discussion will probably go around there, and that is fine as far as we understand that this is a social construction, like that we are mapping what we value and what we perceive for the group that we convene. That's broadly speaking. Please, yes.
A technical follow-up, because you said maybe a group of 3 to 6, but then do you do this in subgroups and then to a broader group, or how does that group dynamic, inner and larger group dynamics work in this boundary setting?
Yes, so usually we can convene depending on the purpose and so on. There could be around 20, sometimes in the classroom is like 20 to 30 people, and then we have like longer period of time. So we still create smaller teams. Sometimes we can have up to 90 or 100 people all sitting in one larger room with smaller groups. One thing that depending on the broader objectives that we set as organizers, trainers, I will reflect a little bit about who we are in doing this, by the way, is to let people rotate across groups a little bit so that there is more of a cross-pollination of ideas between groups. Otherwise, what usually do is that people discuss for a certain period of time, and then they share, they sort of pitch to each other. And part of the ability is also, before participants get lost in the complexity of what they map, is to actually be able to, in 3 to 5 minutes, explain where the discussion goes within the group and share it with others. And it's very interesting backgrounds, the composition of the teams, the age, the gender, the disciplines of origin of what people studied or practiced in their life. Actually, the differences are major. And so that the discussion across groups is very enriching. And what you generally end up with in doing this is getting a general sense of how people think about interconnected problems without actually having too many variables in their head. You know, the variables, they're not too many actually. So it is complex, but it's not that complex that nobody understands. Everybody in the rooms get an understanding of how you can look at problems in different ways. Of course, within the boundaries of who is invited. Yeah, a number of other questions. So that's super fascinating. In fact, I'm very excited about that. Should we, any burning questions needs to be answered right now before?
Yes.
Okay, let's do that then.
I think last one, and then we continue, and then we have another, yeah.
Very
Right,
quick,
please.
how specific does the problem need to be? Like during my talk, we talked about like broad problems versus localized problems.
Yes.
How do you navigate that?
It depends. So when it's a training session, when the purpose is more helping people, support people practice together, thinking in interconnected ways, in other words, practicing systems thinking, can be as broad as possible, right? It doesn't even need to apply to sustainability. It can take further personal issues that are somehow interconnected, you know, like work-life balance, for example. So there is more about the way of thinking rather than the topic in itself. But then, as I will show in a few minutes, when you have a project, for example, funded by the European Union, then the European Union, in a way, as a donor, suggests a problem that you need to address, and so you follow the guidelines of the context where you are operating. So if we are working here with, you know, food innovation or food insecurity in a specific region like Cornwall, then if that's the topic of the debate, then you limit just mentioning the general theme and letting still people explore the different dimensions of it from their own understanding.
Okay, we have a last question online. Hattie, can you make it quite short because we do need to carry on with the presentation?
Hattie?
You need to unmute yourself.
Sorry, hi, just picking up on Stefan's comment about system boundaries and Honor's point about who you're going to have in the room. That's going to affect how they perceive the system that you're mapping. So how do you decide who's in the room?
It's a brilliant question, and it depends on the context of the system mapping session. So I'll give one example from the European Union in a few minutes, and there, so I'll say a few things about that in that specific case. But in general, for example, when we do it in a classroom, well, that is defined by what the classroom has been constituted about. We really work with what we find, honestly. And when we have a choice, I'll discuss how we go about that choice. But in many contexts, like for example, we worked in some rural communities, and then there's a self-selection. If you want a self-selection issue, like the people that convene are people that want to convene. I'm discussing this. So that's something that we need to consider. So that's a big part of the challenge of systems mapping as a process, as I will discuss in a few minutes, is that it basically is subject to all the same issues of other participatory processes, if it makes sense. So whoever participates and gets convened is part of is people that want to participate, in fact. Or otherwise, you need to find ways of like bringing marginal voices in particular ways. And perhaps the next slides would help to discuss how we do it, how we try to do this.
Okay, let's continue. Yeah.
Okay. I'll bring now a specific case that we're involved in the European Union, and in fact, this work is being done really right now together with two of my colleagues. So it's a large European consortium, so we have around 40 colleagues. But in particular, the work of trying to reflect about what we're doing in Hauts-de-France, which is a region in France, north of Paris. Like the largest city is Lille. To give you a sense, it's basically where you take probably many ferry boats to get to UK. Not all, but some at least as far as I understand, has been done together with my colleague Diana Borniotto, that is online. Are you online, Diana?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay,
I
yeah.
can see you, I can hear you.
Excellent, thanks, Diana. So Diana works at UC Louvain, and together with Diana, we are working on this European project since a year, and we have brought systems mapping at the core of this work as a broader intent of the European Union on apply and implement the Green Deal. So the Green Deal strategies, and in particular the Farm to Fork strategy, where in this specific, so basically we are working with 12 cases, and we are trying to work across the skills, as the debate went before, where the issue is how can we try to take something that cuts across the whole Europe, considering the localized realities that compose Europe, right? So this is a little bit more than the $1 billion or euros question of Europe. Is like, how can we even have a transnational policy where our local characteristics are so different all around, from Cornwall down to Romania, or, region Transylvania, for example, with Sicily, with the Algarve and all our local islands. How can we possibly have the same policy that governs us all, right? So we have these cases, and one in particular in Hauts-de-France, where Diana is bringing forward this work, applies a little bit this logic. Okay, as you can imagine, in a project like ours, we brought in this way of thinking of systems mapping into 12 different regions across Europe. So that means that always systems mapping is being carried is a little bit different, and it's happening right now. So Diana had some interviews last Thursday. She will do more next week. So we are reflecting as we go about this. So I'll show you some maps that we are producing with participants, and your input could be very helpful to help us reflect about what we're actually doing. The logic basically, so nothing is clicking. The logic basically is that we are convening participants at a local level. Diana perhaps then can tell you more about how we try to convene them. And as we do this, so we do interviews and focus groups. And then, of course, as we do that, we are also trying to review the literature. Then based on that, we develop some maps at local level. When we can, with the participants in the same room, when it's not possible, we develop maps ex post based on the interaction that we have with them. Based on these maps, we run, not ourselves, but some of our colleagues in other departments, we run some small experiments, sometimes quantitative, sometimes qualitative, and we develop some local actions that are brought forward by these systems maps. We reflect on them, meaning that we try to update our maps based on what we see working in the field and or not. Just to make it clear, at this stage, we are still here. Wait a second. We are still here. We are still developing the first maps. Okay? We are 1 year within the project over 4 years. And then based on this, we have other 9 cases. We are trying to understand how the experiences from these different places actually tells us about how the European strategy overall is working. Where are the bottlenecks? Where are the actors that are clashing with each other? Where are the struggles? And how that basically is brought together in terms of actors. So where the actors need to somehow change in ways that help us to understand what to change in the broader European picture. And so then we bring it into policy discussion. We have some colleagues that are specialized in intervening into policy debates. So and try to shift the policy conversation and then also in terms of business. So we are, in a network of larger businesses and smaller businesses in order to make this change in a way that then we can bring recommendations back to the field in these specific cases. And then we try to bring recommendations to understand in particular where are the lock-ins. When we talk about lock-ins, is in the language of systems thinking, broadly speaking, we're talking about those persistent patterns that somehow get always stuck, like realities that reproduce that do not just allow us to move further from the status quo. I'm very much generalizing, but that is important because once you identify where things keep repeating in the same way without an apparent change that looks desirable, that's where we may want to intervene, or maybe not, or maybe we may have different strategies to address those lock-ins. So those are particularly important. In fact, the team of Diana has specifically studied lock-ins in Louvain. So what this case of Hauts-de-France is particularly about is about the application of the EU biodiversity strategy. So this is not the context across all our 12 projects. So the 12 projects are different aspects of sustainability and resilience of the agricultural system around Europe. But in the case of Hauts-de-France, the implementation of the EU strategy, biodiversity strategy at national level and then at local level is the core. The large picture challenges taking some directives that come from the European Union and translate them in actual practices that can happen in the field at farm level. So you can imagine that there is a lot of steps in between at regional level, supply chain level, farm networks, and then actually what farmers do in their fields in order to support things like reducing pesticides. So what we know from the European legislation is that it's very ambitious, according to many, according to me as well. It's fairly ambitious. And the major question is, can we actually make it happen? Okay, so this is like my value judgment. You may see it different, but something like reducing pesticides, increasing agland diversity, reducing agland pollution from nitrates, regulate freshwater use, the soil use, providing funds that support this could be something beneficial. Okay, I'm not trying to convince you about that, but it could be like a good step further into a certain direction. The challenge is that how is that concretely translated across all these different levels, national, regional, local, in ways that make sense. Okay, that the locals do not think that this is just an imposition from Europe that actually does not apply to a certain territory. France has just revealed, you see it here, it's like July 2023, how they are trying to apply it. So the principles are quite broad and at the moment are up for consultation. So as the team of Diana is going to the field, this is really like a relevant topic for the stakeholders because both the national level is being discussed and then of course the national level is opening for consultation at all the different regional levels. So as you can see in general, broadly speaking, without going too much into the detail, France is trying to translate what the European Union is asking into the national level and telling to the regions what to do. Looking at Hauts-de-France, the agriculture and biodiversity nexus is a bit of a challenge in all regions, and Hauts-de-France is not an exception. We are talking about a territory that is highly urbanized, that has serious biodiversity problems. At the same time, is one of the granaries of Europe. I think in this case, in particular, in terms of potatoes, cereals, especially large monocultures. So it's, making changes somehow needs to take into consideration issues of food security or more broadly of agricultural production, broadly speaking. The support on agroecology transition is still quite modest relative to other investments that are done at agricultural level. So that's something to to consider that there's not being a push on agroecology and biodiversity measures as in other regions. So that is a bit of a challenge. This is an article that comes from a few years ago, from 2018, from a researcher that is at Sorbonne, but comes from Lille, so really from the region. And what she highlights already in the past years, so before the latest policies, that there seems to be a mismatch in the policy environment, which is all about setting objectives that are, pretty much linear, short-term, with where actually nature is going. So, part of what she's saying, public action remains prey of an anthropocentric outlook, which influences the aim and means of biodiversity policies due to existing political and economic constraints. So, while policy seems to be linear and short-term, on the contrary, biodiversity processes seems to be fluctuating and indeterminate temporality proper to ecosystems. So we have a changing environment, and at the same time, policies that seems to be quite rigid, and trying to make impacts in more linear short-term ways. So this is a bit of a tension that often we see between where our natural ecosystems are going, and where our policy process are, the short-term sighted vision that they tend to have. So how do we deal with that? Well, we entered the field, and in particular, the team of Diana entered the field. And one of the things that they try to do in the first round is understanding what are the barriers of implementation of this biodiversity policy. And one very helpful thing that in my view was brought back from these experiences is showing the type of different barriers of translating the political objectives into territorial implementation. So what are the barriers and the lock-ins as they are reproducing? This is just the first attempt of thinking about this. And so this is usually the moment where systems thinkers bring in a complex map, and everybody gets lost. Of course, we don't have the time to delve into the detail, but if you consider about this, there are not even too many variables, right? I mean, there are, here we have like 10 or 15 variables, and this is just the first version. As the team is going back into the field, this is becoming more complex because it's a complex reality, right? So in the next slide, I have double the amount of variables. That's normal. The more you delve into a problem, the more it becomes complex. It's just the nature of things. But these problems can be related to each other, can be understood in entanglement with each other. And so if we take, especially for people that are impacted locally, that understand the local reality, they can take the time to understand it. So one of the messages that I'm getting from this, before we delve into the detail, is that these things are complex, these maps are complex, but maybe as a general population, not just as scientists, we can delve with that complexity to a certain level in participatory settings, okay? So delving into this, what we see is that there are some power dynamics going on between the European Union and the national level member states. There are some financial barriers. So usually, the politics that goes into taking these decisions influence how financial flows are distributed to advisors, which ultimately determine the amount of adoption and the diffusion of agri-environment climate measures, which is, in this case, the objective of these policies, as came further into the discussion. There are some knowledge barriers. So it's like how cooperatives bring this information back to farmers, about how to make which changes to make and how to make changes. There are technical and cultural barriers. I think that, so here the colors are a little bit a bit off into this graphic, but what you can see is that there is something fundamentally cultural about trying to apply biodiversity measures and try to make a change locally, and then there is something that really relates to the ecology aspects of implementing certain measures, meaning implementing biodiversity measures that are applied in other parts of France may not work in that specific region because simply the agroecological conditions are different. So how do you consider all of this together is something that that is important to understand where we may want to intervene next into this. So it gets more complex, we don't need to read that, but the local actors may want to read this because, you know, it's been co-produced. We'll discuss maybe later about how the co-production process went in. The fact of having Diana online, I think that is instrumental to discuss how we bring this together, okay, how her team brought actors together. But what is also important is that, and here's another complex graph, and I think the graphic is a little bit off compared to what I was expecting, but you can take the same bottlenecks and actually look at them in terms of the actors that are involved, okay? So now, before you just have a map of how the problems are interconnected, now you can see how those bottlenecks interconnect in terms of actors, so that then you can think together, how we can think together where it makes sense to intervene. So, for example, again, the graphic is a little bit off, but one of these are, the yellow ones are power dynamics, okay? So where actors are really doing power plays around the implementation of biodiversity on a local level. There are NGOs and unions that are, you know, pushing for advocacy, and then between the European objectives and the national strategies, there are some power plays that are going on between France and the European Union. At regional level, you can see that all the different entities that are part of the region are trying to influence how some of these objectives are influenced, you know, become policy. There are power plays within the agricultural chambers about what is the position that the agricultural sector overall should take in relation to implementing those measures. And then there are power plays in the supply chain, as you can imagine, in terms of how labels and so on becomes, gets pushed into farmers and farming communities. So these are a little bit the translation into power issues translated into where they stand in between the actors, okay? What we are going to do with this comes next, and is not for reflection, but at the moment we are able to, with the local actors, within a few months of work, we are trying to understand where the financial bottlenecks are. Okay, so now I'm going a little bit faster, and then, if you are curious about some of this, we can zoom further. These are the organizational bottlenecks. It's quite interesting to see where the organizational bottlenecks are. Organizational is in particular from the region to the sub-regional level, like, where the municipalities are, okay? So that's where often more than a power struggle of political differences coming together is really about getting the organizational process moving further, like, how to organize the administrative machine in order to have the right forms in the right place, translated in ways that people understand. So here it seems to be like a general bottleneck, and doesn't surprise anybody. In fact, in France, that takes place. It's quite famous to have a bit of a administrative jungle that needs to be addressed. Okay. There are knowledge flows where the communication between actors and it's constraining. I'm sorry that the graphic is a little bit off, but I hope you just get the general sense of what this represents. Here we have some cultural bottlenecks, which really sparked my interest when Diana reported this back to us a few months ago, which denotes a general gap between the public sector in France, between the regional and territorial actors, and the market dynamics. It seems that culturally there has been a lack of a historical lack of communication and understanding about what the private sector is doing and the public sector is doing, as well as things like cooperatives and small associations. They are not culturally used to bring knowledge back to farmers that relates to the environmental dimension of things. So all in all, what we've got here, and now I open again for questions, and Diana, hopefully you will help me with the more detailed questions, is an example of where we are at the moment of using maps in order to translate issues, okay, and how the issues are interrelated with each other, where these issues are in terms of the actors involved in a very specific case. I'll pause it here and then we'll go with final reflection. If you have questions, I see there are a couple in the rooms.
So let's focus specifically on this case, maybe, and then this is more about broadening out again. Yeah.
And Diana, please correct all the mistakes I've done on the detailed case. Thank you.
It was perfect.
Okay, so on people online, if you put your question in the chat or raise your hand, I'm not quite sure I can see raising hands, but yeah, are there any questions? Yeah, if you're in the back, you have to speak quite loudly. Project your voice.
Thanks, Domenico. Just relevant to the talk about power structures, and relevant to who's in the room and who's not in the room. Would the actors involved in the mapping system discuss the power relations in the room?
I bring it to Diana. Diana, could you hear the question?
No, can you repeat it, please? Because it was very, very far, the voice.
Sorry.
Absolutely. Should I?
Yeah, you repeated, I think.
I try to make a bridge, okay? So the way I understand the question, Diana, is basically, maybe could you clarify or say something about who was in the room and you know, you're generally involved into these discussions that produce these maps, and whether these power struggles were discussed openly, especially these yellow ones that we see on the screen. Are they discussed openly during the convening, or it's more you know, our interpretation based on what you heard?
Yeah, actually, it's a very fair point. So who was it first? Who was in the room? So I first selected the list of actors I was talking to. So first of all, I did some semi-directive interviews with most of the actors that are represented in this map. And I have retrieved these actors. So I made like 26 interviews so far. My first approach was an expert consultation. So I had like first insight on the people I should contact that know the territorial system occurring in Hauts-de-France. And then through a snowball sampling approach, I went further and further to like really trying to map the boundaries of the actors that have an active role around the research question I was asking, was the implementation, a territorial implementation of EU biodiversity objectives in a regional context. So that is the way I managed to talk to people, and the map was built up based on the insight of each singular interviews. So I was asking the same question, and then I cross-check for robustness, and I presented, in the meanwhile I was building up this map, I presented this map to the actors involved in the interviews. And then what I did, that I conducted a seminar to to all of them, but not all of them were present, mainly based on constraint and on interest. And I validate this map with them. So I integrated their feedbacks afterwards. And what I'm aiming to do is that I'm aiming to bring up discussions about relationship between barriers and, of course, the one also on power dynamics barriers throughout a focus group and a workshop that I will be doing with them on the 14th of November. So I'm aiming, so this kind of power barriers, power dynamics barriers that were put it there, came out of interviews that I conducted. So they were them. They were talking about those kind of power dynamics. Some of them contradicted one another, but eventually I integrated the most complete set of barriers. And then I will discuss with them openly during the focus group. I hope this answered the question.
Do you have some follow-up questions on this, or?
Thank you, that was that did generally answer the question. Just one follow-up of, was there any assessment, I think perhaps this is in the systems mapping part as opposed to this analysis of it, assessment of the power dynamics within the room of people doing the systems dynamics, were some ideas put forward more forcefully than others, for example?
Yeah, my understanding from Diana, and Diana, please correct me if I'm wrong on this, is that so far she conducted the individual interviews.
Yeah.
Okay, and then the map was somehow brought to other interviews as an aggregate, but the interviews were done individually.
Yeah.
And now what is upcoming in mid-November, if I understood correctly, is a session where participants that were interviewed will join together, and a discussion will happen. So I don't think, Diana, and then again, correct me if I'm wrong, that the actors involved actually already met with each other in front of the map at the moment. And we're leaving as much as freedom as possible to the individual teams. They are involved in all these case studies. Okay, to go from Italy to Serbia to to France, to decide what is the best way of convening participants. In some cases, also depending on how wicked is the problem. It's better to bring them in the same room versus talk to them separately and then convening them afterwards. Is that correct, Diana? So the different interviewees that brought the knowledge for these maps, they didn't meet each other yet. Is that right?
Yeah, but I am relying nevertheless on a community that knows each other, because they are all related one to another. So this map actually showed that they collaborate, or somehow they are in touch one another. So usually whenever I conducted an interview, that person was related to the others. So they know each other. Is that the overall big picture somehow escapes some of the actors, because they are of course focused on some specific action. So the interest of the focus group will be to raise some sort of like awareness about the overall picture and somehow empower them with the understanding of, okay, the lock-in occurs in different places, and my barriers that I'm facing are related to other actions that I can't actually see. So that is the overall purpose. But as I was saying already, some discussions have occurred in a seminar that I did with them, showing the map. And then for some power dynamics, they agreed, and for some others, they didn't. So yeah, we will continue the discussion further.
Thank you. We've got a few more questions lined up. So can I just take one online? I don't know how to pronounce that name. As a French speaker, maybe you can.
Louvain, we can see that you have a raised hand. Would you like to pose your question? Unmute. Yes.
Hello, can you hear me well?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes, thanks for this presentation. It's very nice. I'm actually a colleague of Diana, so hi there. I was wondering, but maybe it's questions that are more related to the conceptual, thinking about the bottlenecks and lock-ins. So first, I wasn't sure that I got the difference between the lock-ins and what is called the bottlenecks. So I would be very interested to talk about that. And then the second question that I had was, I was wondering, so right now the COSO map is actually mapping the implementation of biodiversity policies at the territorial level. But I was also wondering if there were any plans to use COSO map or COSO diagrams to look at the different bottlenecks that were identified. So yeah, let me know if my question is clear, but there are two parts.
Yes. So in terms of the first point, I mean, there's a number of terms that often get mixed up. That's a little bit normal when we work with large teams of different researchers. So bottlenecks, barriers, in this case, to implementation or to innovation, you can think it more broadly as, as struggles to move forward in a certain direction. Okay, so in this case, the direction is the one set up by the European Union towards the implementation of biodiversity measures. The lock-ins in the more broader systemic literature or systems thinking literature relates to patterns that keep repeating themselves and the factors that make those patterns repeat themselves. So it's a little bit more underlying and structural than bottlenecks, but they are somehow related. And in the broader conversation, you can use them as synonyma. But I think lock-ins in general are more underlying. Is those factors that keep repeating certain patterns that seems to be constituting the problem.
So they're negative. They're always negative. Always negative.
Yeah, the lock-ins usually have a negative connotation. Diana, I know that your group also did research on that, but in general, I think the lock-ins in a system is seen negative. The broader answer is that, of course, whether it's negative or positive or neutral really depends on your values. And so in a way, if you don't think that biodiversity or this biodiversity policy should be implemented, ultimately all those bottlenecks may be seen as positive, and the lock-ins that make them, that perpetuate them.
Okay, got a question here.
Yeah. I just wanted to ask you sort of actually about the lock-ins. They sound a lot like those infinite loops that you talk about, and how do you because obviously I think you're talking about that in a socially constructed way. How do you then find the least objectionable alternative to get out of that loop? Is that where the envisioning comes in? Or is that something completely different where you just come and say, "Ooh, what do we all find as the least hurtful, or the least, problematic solution to the problem?"
I absolutely love the question because it's for me it's very where do we go on from here, right? So the way I understand it is how do you act on lock-ins, with who supporting the addressing of which lock-ins? As everything else in participatory processes, the person that you convene determine where you are going to intervene, on which lock-in you are going to intervene. So in a case like this, what is important, I think, and then I'm always curious about hearing more local voices, but in general, if we are supportive of the implementation and effective and rapid implementation of biodiversity measures in a certain region, I think that understanding where there is the broadest coalition to address certain lock-ins, that's where we should intervene. So I would go broad rather than specific. Going specific would be convening a few that are really trying to subvert certain power structures and saying, well, even if the other actors are not on board, we are going to do it anyways, right? With a smaller set of actors convened. But in this case, since we are trying to implement a territorial strategy where farmers are involved, where markets actors are involved, and all these actors, I think it is important to address a variety of them with them on board, especially if there is not a strong power structure in place trying not to implement the biodiversity. So this is just my partial interpretation of what I see here on the map, is that most of the reason why certain policies are not implemented territorially is, lack of knowledge of how to act, where, how, with which practices, and a lot of organizational bottlenecks in between about actually sorting out the bureaucracy of doing that. So all of that could be addressed with broader coalition. I don't know if I'm answering any of your questions.
Okay, we're sort of really running out of time. So two short questions, please. First, Hattie online, and then we've got another one there. Hattie first, quick question, please.
Pretty quick, just following on from that do you quantify any of the elements in your system, Domenico? Are you going to turn into any sort of systems dynamics model?
Good question. Within the broader scope of the project, personally, I don't think we need to quantify all of this. So that's not the main purpose, in my view, of this. Although once we may run some experiments, some quantitative experiments about certain practices that are meaningful locally through behavioral experiments. So we have a whole team that can take certain measures that may make sense within specific regions within Hauts-de-France and turn this into quantitative experiments to see how farmers, where farmers' incentives may lie under certain conditions.
Okay, great. And another quick one.
Thank you. Yeah, great presentation. My question was around slightly linking into the intervention side, and it'd be great to hear more about that. But I was wondering over this process, so you're saying a year in so far, and some people just through the process of engaging with your project, I suppose, could have changed in their mindsets, could have already started changing how they work with other actors. So I suppose there's a question around whether it be a theory of change model or another model that captures your impact as you go before you even get to the experiment or intervention stage, just through the process of people engaging, and whether or not that's something you're also.
Absolutely.
Quick, short repetition of the question, because maybe online,
yes,
they didn't hear everything.
The question, the way I understand it, I was thinking as I was hearing it. So my understanding is, how do we capture the impact of this sort of mapping process along the way before seeing the results within 4 years, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not a project that requires baseline data, but some changes possibly already happening, and it's just what if you capture that?
Absolutely. The short answer is no, we're not capturing it, and the slightly broader answer is that I'm doubtful about capturing any impact about what we're actually doing in general, and in particular with systems mapping activities. Like in a way, as a system thinker, I think that impacts are determined by so many different factors at the same time that trying to capture them, I think, would be very helpful in a way, because you can in a way prove that you are making something happen, but at the same time, people are influenced by so many different sources that I really wouldn't know even how to go to measure the impact, in fact. So that's thank you. Maybe others have ideas on how to go about it. We have also discussed about this, but this is my personal view. Should we go on?
Yes, please.
Okay, so just based on this, a few reflections here. I think it's going to be fairly shorter and simpler, at least graphically simpler than what we've done so far. Systems mapping in general, what we've learned so far, based on our experience in this case. It's a social construction. Everything that you see in those maps, no matter how complex it is, it's still what we value and what we perceive as the people that source this process. Is a way that could help to visualize our own values. Like, my students, the participants we work with, as they decide what to map, they can reflect back on themselves. And that is fascinating, I think. Their values, their perceptions, their vision. Going a little bit more in detail, what I'm fascinated about this whole area of mapping, like drawing these sketches, is that you can somehow learn fairly effectively, fairly rapidly about a problem, by a complex problem, by basically visualizing it together. And that aspect of doing that together is powerful. You can actually get to grips with it together. Often things that are in our head. So my assumption is that often we do this complex work anyways in our heads, no matter if we sit down together with others and we share it, or whether it's just we give it by ourselves. So being able to make it explicit to some extent can really be helpful. We talked also before in the call with in the talk with Anna about coherence of action. You know, like it's been part of our trade-off. So how, to what extent we want to find coherence in the actions that we find towards a common goal that we may have towards sustainability, and doing these maps in general help us to understand what others are doing and how we want to position our actions in relation to what others are thinking to do. No matter whether we want to coordinate with them or partner up, collaborate, knowing that we cannot collaborate with everybody in a space, even in a region, locally. We don't have time to collaborate with everybody. Our time is limited. But if we know what the others are doing, then we can cohere with their actions, even if we don't talk to them. And maps help with that. And perhaps we can cohere even with the ones that we are in conflict with. Okay, so even if somebody has opposite ideas, we can perhaps enter into a sort of coherence in addressing collective problems. Doubts that I hope you can see from where we are with this case of Hauts-de-France. Well, we are really doubting how we can balance complexity and participation, and then, you know, more deeply, like, does it make any sense, like, trying to get into this complexity, or does it make any sense to get into this level or to a certain level of participation? How do we balance it is something that we are reflecting upon. Who are we as we do this work? So we are scientists, okay. Social scientists that are trying to do interdisciplinary work, it's okay. But in particular, who are we, in the tasks that we do with these participants? Are we facilitators? Are we trying to push a specific issue? Are we trainers? Are we analysts? Are we a little bit in between? Something that we need to do some, I would say, identity work ourselves, at least as social scientists that enter this complex terrain as we move along. Are we doing any transformation? So, like, are we even trying to transform something? Can you transform, shift powers, bridge networks if you are working within the system in a way? And is it even desirable to transform anything? More broadly, and again, is it pretentious to try to map problems from places which we do not inhabit? Or should we take a more Gaia perspective, say, well, we're talking about the Earth, okay? No matter if I'm based in Montpellier or in Cornwall, we should discuss each other's problems locally and globally in the way they are related. So, but sometimes it feels pretentious, I need to admit, that, you are talking about problems in Hauts-de-France where I've hardly ever been, right? So you can think about how how it may feel, as a researcher in doing this. This is a slide that is the lived reflection from Diana as she did it. I just formatted it a little bit, but one key point that she's making from being in the field there in Hauts-de-France is somehow we need to have some governance to manage the participatory process, like some rules of the game, in a way of like how we define the collective problem, how we implement it. So what struck me about the point that she made from being with the stakeholders is like identifying the joint problem and keeping the focus on that problem. How you keep that problem at the center, acknowledging that there are different opinions and conflict of values, and and finding the role of facilitation, like are we facilitators indeed, or should we take a different stance than a facilitator? Do we even have funding for a facilitator if it's part of a project? So this is my general broader view when we do the systems mapping, and it comes also from the work I do with my students. That often when we propose systems mapping, they come up with visions of the future that are very human-centric. Now I teach in a business school, but also when I work with participants in the industry, they come up with visions that are not the visions that I would propose personally. Okay, so I'm struggling with that. I come from a pragmatist perspective, so I bring people together, find them to have a productive discussion, having a good time along that, and the outcome of these discussions bring up visions that do not often correspond to my own visions. So one of the points that I'm thinking from a really epistemological perspective is whether our role is the one of creating tools that facilitates this dialogue, or rather, it's trying to take a more normative perspective, say, well, we have some problems, the way I see them, that requires us to be normative in the way we facilitate dialogue between people that bring, for example, relational human views more at the core, no matter what people want to discuss. So I'll pause it here for discussion, and that's it for now. So huge thanks to Diana and Marija that they are part of this journey with me on this systems mapping. Thank you.
Okay, we've got some more time for questions. So people online, please raise your hand if you want, or put your messages into the chat, which we can see here. So yeah, please go ahead. Why don't you start here for the moment?
It's a quick one. And relates to the participatory nature of this. So don't you think that one big caveat of systems thinking in a more general sense, of which I understand systems mapping is a bit of an sort of operationalized version, if you like. The big caveat is that whatever is the participatory mechanism that put in place, and we should be very clear that it's participatory, is not representative. It's not necessarily a democratic process, for example, right? But my point is the following. To me, we are already invoking a mechanism that discusses problems between actors that do understand that there is a common problem. So it's like the assumption is that there is a common field platform. I struggle to think about, I'm sorry to bring in political issues right now, but I struggle to feel that any systems mapping can help Palestine and Israelis right now, right? And I'm using it quite dramatically to say that it seems like it's a sort of post-conflict or pre-conflict type of situation, while the real issues cannot be tackled in this way. I don't know whether it's because I'm aging and becoming disillusioned, or whatever it is that I feel like, because I'm quite interested and trying to do similar processes. And I feel like, okay, yeah, but even if in the room there are people with different values, well, they're still reconcilable. They can still kind of find a way of creating a dialogue. What do you do with people that don't want to talk to you at all?
Absolutely.
They don't see you, they don't hear you.
Absolutely. No, it's a brilliant question. And I disagree with you, but it's a disagreement based on like the fact that systems mapping can be implemented in so many different ways. And in fact, I think that productive discussions, also as we discussed before, can be done, especially on taboo topics. It's just about how you bring people together. I mean, in the case that you are referring to, I would not bring people together. And in many easier situations, I would not bring people together. Even in Hauts-de-France, I don't know if that was the case, but especially when you're not fully familiar, personally familiar with a problem. So sometimes you may realize when you enter the room after convening people that the problem is bigger than what can be discussed in the room. So probably that's a mistake already being made. Okay? So a prudent way is not convening people together until you understand how serious and wicked is the problem, meaning how much certain values are being in clash with each other. You're mentioning like one of the most serious problems going on at the moment, but there are many other situations such as in Ethiopia. We did this in Ethiopia, understanding lock-ins in innovation in the veterinary sector, livestock sector of Ethiopia. We don't convene people together because we know that there are, that the government may not enjoy where some of the discussions are going. Okay? And the situation is like much I mean, it's clearly every situation problem is different, but you don't want to do that unless you, you are fairly sure that people can discuss certain topics in a room. So I would say, yes, system mapping, you can do it, but you can do it as a, more channeled discussion, before bringing. So I think there is a bigger issue of participatory processes of not bringing people together until you're sure about what you're doing.
Okay.
Maybe Domenico,
Yes.
can you hear me?
Yeah, we
Just-
see you also now. Great.
Yeah, I just maybe it's just a reflection, but because we talked about the Hauts-de-France, maybe I can just add one thing that I realized while speaking to the actors, because at the beginning, not all of them wanted to talk to me. So I was stuck with the issue of wanting them, but they didn't want me. But eventually I realized that the role also the researcher has, or I had to have, was building a trust relationship with them. And this takes a lot of time, but is somehow correlated with the interest. So the more trust you have, the more the interest you will get on the topic you're dealing with. And somehow it's contagious. I mean, if you go deep in trying to build a community around a topic, perhaps a community that is already there, you need to build that trust, and the power of the trust that you build and the role that relationship has while facing a common issue is kind of like pivotal somehow, at least for my own experience.
Thanks a lot, Diana. I mean, perhaps.
Yeah, Anna was first, and then.
Yeah, so I have a bit of a critical question. But I also understand that it's part of your funding, right? So you say a lot of the answers are perhaps human-centered, but isn't the question that you are asking very human-centered as well? Because the question is about implementation and translation of policy. But isn't that already 2 steps too far? Shouldn't the conversation have started before the policy was even developed? And then isn't that there where, for example, natural sciences come in? Because it's not an interdisciplinary question at the moment. It's a social science question. Whereas the policy in itself and kind of the consultation that comes there, that's where the interdisciplinarity happens. And that's where natural scientists, for example, biologists bringing their biodiversity standpoint. And I understand that this is an EU-funded project. But ideally, wouldn't you start before the policy is formulated?
Yes, indeed. So I mean, part of the answer is what you mentioned. It's like, you move into the boundaries where you can move. So the projects, the programs define you. Okay. The other aspect is that there are indeed material bottlenecks that maybe depending who is in our team. In our team, indeed, is a prominently a social science team within this project. But what we realize very clearly is that the intervention, these ecological measures that happen on the ground, actually, they need to vary at nanoscale, right? I mean, depending whether your farm is here or there, or behind the hill, depending on humidity and other conditions, soil, they need to be different type of interventions. And there, we don't have the granularity to decide how to go about it. So part of the actions could be that indeed we need to engage with local teams that understand the biology of things, for example, to act on it. But yeah, the broader scheme, and indeed you said it's the project has been designed in terms of implementation of the Green Deal, and in particular the farm to fork strategy. So we are moving within boundaries that are set. So yeah.
Okay. Sorry, there was one in the middle. Yes.
Yes, I'm particularly interested in actually thinking back to the first presentation that we had, where we were discussing the role of universities and the connections that we can make in the research that we're doing, and just see that universities have a unique position of real expert independent subjective views, and I think your illustration really proudly illustrates the value of systems mapping to
to help people understand each other and what all the conflicts are. And I just liken it to that phrase of seek first to understand before you can hope to be understood. And I'm interested in whether the project that you're doing, are there key sponsors to that, who are, with clear goals as to what the outcome of these, this can be? Because I just see there's such an opportunity to help drive a solution if we can get real pivotal, powerful sponsors to help agree and drive that change.
Absolutely. So I mean, the sponsors are really, we're being quite opportunistic, right? I mean, we go where we can find sponsors, but we enjoy in particular when we can have sponsors that finance a piece of research about this, because that allows us to reflect about what we are doing. Well, it's like lots of sponsors that give us just enough budget to run the mapping, right? So we do sessions and so on. That allows us to do some of this work, the facilitation, but not to have the time to reflect upon it. And so, but luckily enough, in the past we had funding, and the European Union, give us basically the buffer in order to reflect, to have this reflection. And that is super helpful, in fact, because I think there's a lot of need to reflect, like doing, reflecting, sharing practices as we're doing now. See where this is bringing us. So that is a bit of a circle. I don't know if I'm addressing your question.
I suppose that's my observation. I think, been working in industry, in order to get any change to happen, you need to have really powerful sponsors who are responsible for the project or working in partnership with the project to really be able to drive a solution forward. And so it's just seeing what opportunities there.
But this brings us back to power.
Yeah.
So these powerful actors, to what extent are they willing and able to give up power? So you can talk and talk about potential solutions, but the question I think remains is, where's the power? Is the power represented? And even if the power is represented, to what extent is the dialogue perhaps, maybe just a discursive sort of playing field for nothing really to change?
Yeah, I mean, so we can have all these amazing, interesting discussions, but then actually say, well, how have we actually moved that discussion and results forward? And I just see there's a real opportunity for us within the education sector to influence that.
Got another question? Do you want to come in?
Yeah, thank you. I'm thinking we're making it short, but to make this point on the actors looking at it from the ground up rather than top down, which I think this project is like sort of policy level, and involved in a project that's at the other end, like the ground level up, but very much we're doing pre-systems mapping and then interventions, and hoping to model those interventions to inform policy if we're able to. And I was just wondering, you mentioned some of the other work you've done, systems mapping in Ethiopia, Project Amin is in the Philippines and Fiji in the Caribbean, so in some lower middle income countries. And I was just wondering if you were having to say a little bit about where you've applied a similar approach, but with quite a different audience.
Absolutely, it's a super fascinating question. In fact, I love to do that type of work. For example, in rural Malawi, we have the opportunity of really doing some of this mapping starting from like just villages of like 50 people or 50 households, mostly around dairy. And one way to go about that, in our case, is this aspect of building trust that Diana was mentioning. It's super important. We spent around 2 months of doing ethnographic work in the communities, living in the communities, in order to understand a little bit, for people to understand our practices, our general purpose. And then, from there, understanding what were the issues that dairy farmers were facing. Again, it's still a project. A donor in this case was the Dutch Scientific Council, that sponsored us to be there. So we are not scrapping our own resources to go into these communities. But still, you know, it was a different type of approach. Like there was no policy implementation, was still trying to understand local issues.
Yeah.
That's the type of work I personally enjoy the most. And then I see the value of doing this as trying to think along the same lines, like, you know, thinking in terms of interconnected variables, bidirectionally, you know, with all the participants. So that's it. It's fascinating. It's empowering. So I'm very curious about your work in these different countries.
Okay, we need to sort of come to an end. A few people had to leave already because we're out of time. There is this question here. How can we be sure that we have built a comprehensive overview of the context concepts to eventually be able to propose key actionable recommendations?
Because don't want to participate in research. Yeah. So indeed, two aspects that I see in this question is, first of all, building a comprehensive overview. Personally, I would give up trying to give a comprehensive overviews. I mean, based on the fact that what we're mapping is subjective. So whoever we can convey in the discussion represents their perceptions and values again. So no comprehensive overview being attempt to be made, I would say. But it's interesting, the second part of the question you're mentioning, how we go about some actors that do not want to participate. My view is that we just, there is no need to insist. Because again, as Stefano was mentioning, you know, we don't need to be representative, we need to be participatory. If some people do not want to join the dialogue, we can either try to, if we think it's valuable, to try to gauge their perspective, because we value their perspective, and if we do not value their perspective, because maybe they are antithetic to our own values, we just don't map them and we try to work around them. We often do that with corporations. Some corporations do not want to go in the direction that we value, we just work around them, as we see. And systems mapping actually, it's very good to find ways of working around some actors and try to co-opt their actions. So it's a little bit my answer.
Okay, I think we need to come to an end. We're sort of out of time. But you know, the lively discussion shows that, you know, there's real interest in this. And so thank you very much for giving insights into your very, very, well, I think very powerful work, and hope the project you're working on with your collaborators is going to be successful, and that you can actually drive some change forward. So thank you very much, Domenico, for coming all the way.
Well, thanks for having me. Indeed, thanks for your